I'm recording outside. This is day 3 already. Okay, good morning, Mike. Okay, I mentioned covering details, packet tracers, if you run into issues. We discussed a little bit more cut through and store and forward. Talked about cut through, we talked about port speed on our devices, talked a little bit about errors, and then we also talked about, when you have trouble with packets being dropped or not, and make the difference if you're running TCP or UDP. Then talked a little bit about collision domains and how if we're running full duplex and switches nowadays, full duplex and content addressable memory, they're extremely fast, and we really don't have collision domains on the ports anymore like you would with half duplex. Now that led us into the idea of broadcast domains and understanding a little bit why we segment a network. We break it into separate networks. For example, you might have a network on VLAN 99. We'll keep talking about that. But that's important because when we take a scenario like we have over here, okay, we gotta draw a circle around this whole thing. We have, in this example, we've got a green VLAN and a green VLAN up here. So those two can communicate without affecting any other traffic. Same thing, we got this red VLAN is going to communicate with this red VLAN. That traffic's not going to, well, I shouldn't say that. They're on separate broadcast domains. Okay? So when it does an ARP, when this laptop gets hooked up and does an ARP, the only place it's going to see the ARP are just the green VLAN. Same thing, we add a PC over here to the VLAN 20, the red one. Only those places that are on that VLAN are going to see that traffic. Okay? So, we talked about the different ports. You can have an access port, and you can assign that port to a VLAN. And access means we're going to have communications to that port from the outside. If you're connecting two switches and you need to exchange the VLAN information, then we have a trunk. Getting a little messy, but we can have a trunk. Now on the 3550s, you'll want to set your encapsulation. You'll have to look up the syntax, but you'll set the encapsulation to .1Q so the frames get encapsulated with the correct tag. And then you can set it to a trunk. So, we were concerned, make sure we understand ports, MAC address for those on a layer 2 switch, and then we make VLANs. Okay? We'll talk more about IP addressing here in a minute. So, we wanted at least 3 VLANs with ports on them on each of the devices. And the labs had some examples of VLANs. One last comment on this page. Dynamic trunking protocol. That and native VLANs can cause some problems. We typically will not use that. We'll just set the trunks. And we'll talk more about that in the future during the term. Okay, so now this was our next big step. Inside the multi-layered switch, we turned on routing, IP routing, which then affects the whole switch. Okay, then we did for this port, since we wanted a router port to connect to the router, we said no switch port. And then it allowed us to add an address to that port. this should have been a 5. Let me really emphasize that. That should have been a 5, and this should have been a 6. That was my bad in the notes. Okay? So, we assign this addressing down here. We already had the addressing up here. So our next goal was to get some type of connectivity between these devices. The whole idea here of segmenting the network into separate networks for the VLANs, and the students then, they figured out what they were going to use as addressing for their VLANs. And then one other thing to re-emphasize, this idea inside that frame header, we add a tag. So if you're on this switch and you're going to this one, you can have here a trunk, and it will tag the information as it leaves and then puts it on the correct VLAN when it gets into the other switch. Okay. Here we can wrap up things. Again, day 3. This is Wednesday. So, the students had already set some IP addresses, and these actually then are separate networks. So they did a switch virtual interface, and they have these set up. You know, as an example, VLAN, ops, parking lot, and sales, and then they put some ports on each of these VLANs. They set up similar addressing in the switch. Obviously for VLAN 10 down there they had to use a different address, but the same network. Okay? Same network. And then we set up the connection here to this network. I got my addressing correct this time. And then inside the multi-layered switch, they're going to need a default route pointing out. Not the IP default gateway for the switching fabric, but for the routing part. Okay? Pointing the traffic out. Then they should be able to, from this switch, ping all the addresses, because this device, the routing part, will route the traffic between the VLANs. You can see that in the routing table if you look at it. Okay, so to wrap up the day, you guys can submit your excuse me, at least your configs for all 3 devices. If you do some clarification, you don't actually have to submit the document in 3.6.2, but you should read through it just to see what questions they were asking. Okay, and then key thing is to do the packet tracers and follow-up for Module 4, and we'll start off on Thursday with some review items. We'll take a look at some items that we've been working on, and then we'll take a look at your configuration. So that's it.